Hi, I'm Kelsey Thornton, and I went to school for textile design. I graduated in 2012 from UMass Dartmouth, and since then I've taught at a few universities teaching textile design, fashion design, um, other fiber related classes, and I'm excited to fill you in on what textile design is and some important vocabulary that's involved in textile design. So let's jump right into it. So, textile design is the process of designing the different structures and looks of different textile fabrics. So this doesn't mean just the pattern that um, goes on the fabric. It means also the structure of the fabric. Is it a knit or is it a woven? Um, what type of fiber is it made of? What is the finish like on those fibers? There's all kinds of things that go into making a fabric, and someone has to decide each of those steps along the way. What my classes normally focus on is designing the repeat patterns that go on textiles. But even if a textile is solid colored, someone still had to design those patterns, those or that textile. There's no pattern on it, but they had to decide if it was a knit or a woven, what type of fiber it's made out of, what color fabric, what dye that was. Someone made all those decisions along the way, and that is textile design. It's a huge market where graphic design and fashion design meet, and interior design, really, and any kind of thing that uh, uses repeating patterns, or uses fabrics in terms of textile design. All right, so when we're designing textiles, we're going to consider the following. You should decide what the purpose of the textile is. And my classes normally focus on fashion design, but it's important to consider also, like, it could be an indoor or an outdoor fabric, in terms of the overall structure of how the textile industry works. These are some of the different categories in terms of purpose. And of course, these fabrics would be totally different than the types of like fibers and fabrics that you would use in fashion design, right? You wouldn't put the same fabric on like an evening dress that you would on like an outdoor patio furniture or on a bus, or, you know, you should also consider the target market when designing. So is it for children? Is it for men or women? And all of these categories. And like there's so many other target markets. These are just like the most basic ones that I've listed here. In a classroom environment, I would now ask you to name some other sub-markets or other target markets. And ones that come to mind that have fun textile designs are like goth and like rave cultures, and someone who's maybe more preppy, or a target market could be moms or parents. There's so many different options, and I'm sure you're well versed in what defines a target market and already have target markets that you like designing for. So another thing to consider is what the motif is, and motif is a big vocab word for us. A motif means um, the artwork that makes up the pattern, right? And there's a few different options or like categories for motifs when we're talking about textile design, and those are conversational. And conversational motifs are motifs where you can point at something and know that it is something. Like if Well, for example, these skeletons are a conversational motif. They're also maybe kind of like a holiday theme, but holidays are conversationals. Because like if something was covered in Santa Clauses, you could, the way I remember it is like you could point at that and start a conversation about your Santa Claus skirt or whatever. Or if a garment was covered in rubber ducks, right, that would be a great conversation starter. So those are conversational pieces because they're recognizable. Um, Another category is abstract, like this beautiful textile design. And I think that abstract sometimes is like the hardest textile designs to do, is to make a really good abstract pattern that's balanced. So I always really appreciate abstract. And then florals. So florals, although they are a recognizable object, right? Like conversationals are. Florals are their own category because they are so incredibly ubiquitous in textile design. And actually, we have a whole project where we design florals. We actually have a whole project where we design conversationals too, but florals are such an interesting category because they can be broken up into so many subcategories of more romantic florals, more detailed ones, more abstract ones. So that's all. It's all very fun to explore the floral category of the textile design market. So the scale of the repeat is also something to consider. I actually have two slides here, this one and this one. The scale of the repeat can be extremely important in conveying like the mood or the feeling of the garment, right? So even though these might be similar kind of brushstrokey patterns, this giant scale version with these bold colors is really powerful and kind of out there, where this suit is much more demure and like ready for the office. Wrong way. And even though this is the exact same pattern, they're both like polka dots that are half offsets in a step. They are wildly different garments. And if you even consider like if these tiny dots were on this sweater, it would make this sweater so much less playful and more kind of subdued, I guess. And if those giant dots were on this skirt, it would make the dress like incredibly playful and exciting. Even though I do think that the polka dots make this dress playful, it's just that the tiny scale has made it also like, I don't know, sexy. So hopefully that's all making sense. The layout is the next thing to consider, and the layout is not to be confused with the structure of the repeat, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute. But the layout is just talking about kind of, in general, what direction your repeat is going. So the most obvious one to point out here is the one-way directional. So this is probably a good place to start, these birds. If we cut out an apron from these birds and we cut it out upside down and we sewed that apron, it would always be the apron with the upside down birds on it. This is a one-way print and it's designed to be used only in that direction, right? So we would want to like recut the apron or figure out a way to flip it around after we made that mistake because it's a one-way print. If we made that mistake with a two-way print, much like this cotton plant print up here, we would be able to flip it. It wouldn't be a mistake with this print, essentially. It would be correct because this is a two-way print and it can be viewed and used in two directions. You know, traditionally, who's to say your upside down bird print apron wouldn't be the favorite? So, and then a four-way print, I have one example of that, is this kind of like pretty symmetrical print. Which we also have symmetrical and asymmetrical as layout options, right? This is a very asymmetrical abstract print, And this is a this is also asymmetrical, and maybe, yeah, maybe asymmetrical. Maybe it's kind of a tossed print. The tossed is maybe one of the harder layouts to get right. A tossed print should have no direction. You see in this example that um, all of the dots, or all of the teapots and the pies and everything, they're all facing different directions, and no matter which way you viewed it, that would all be, uh, no matter which way you cut pieces out, they would work every which way, which is very valuable sometimes, especially in like quilting fabrics. You see a lot of tossed in quiltings, but also, just everywhere. They're really a staple of the textile design industry. Okay, so engineered layouts are their own specific category of textile design, and we might talk about them a little, but it's important to kind of know what they are. These designs are essentially designed around the pattern of a garment, right? So they're designed so that when you cut around the pattern, it creates a complete, like, seamless textile design. Like, even though this necklace goes onto her back, it goes onto her back, seamlessly, we can imagine, which would require you to place the prints in very specific places and cut around them in very specific ways to create. So this is a very cool category of textile design. Printing is definitely something to consider when designing textile designs. How the object is going to be printed is hugely important in how you design your fabrics, because traditionally textile design works with a limited number of fabrics. Or sorry, a limited number of colors, sorry. So in the most traditional type of printing that we can do, block printing, right? We only have two colors, sorry. We only have two colors because you only have the color of the block and then the color of the background fabric, right? And the block is placed on to the fabric. So that's this example right here. And two-color designs, if I see a nice two-color design, I'm always impressed, right? Because it means that you've balanced your space appropriately and you know how to work with positive and negative space. So it can be a challenge to work in only two colors, and something that all of you should probably try at some point. In more modern screen printing, but still like traditional screen printing that we think of, we have something called well, just like it's called screen printing. This is for real screen printing because you're squeezing ink through a screen, right? So this squeegee is pressing down on a pile of ink and it's forcing it through this screen, and the screen is only letting it through on this area that is you can kind of see, and that doesn't have this blocker on it that is essentially been painted on in that pattern or applied in that pattern. There's various ways of getting it to be perfect. And so this is one color, and if we wanted this to be a three-color print, four colors including the background, right? Let's say they're printing this on a white t-shirt, this orange. They print the black first, they let that dry. The black has just the outline on the screen, and then you get a whole nother screen that you've had to prepare overnight, and you screen print just the orange, and you have to make sure it's perfectly lined up with the black. And then you get a whole third screen, and you have it just have the green on it, and you have to make sure it is perfectly aligned with the orange or with the orange and the black, and then you print that. So you have to wait for all of those to dry in between in standard screen printing. So it is, uh, kind of laborious, and also um, there's a limited number of colors because you're limited by the physical number of screens that you can produce that day. So normally we limit you to 6 colors or 10 colors in a lot of the projects, and that's pretty much industry standard for like the maximum amount of colors that you could get in a single run. Um, for these types. And so when we ask you to do these assignments where we're limiting the number of colors, that's because textile industry standards still suggest that you limit colors in designs because it makes them able to be printed on more options, right? Digital printing is a relatively new type of printing. I mean, it's not really that new, but it's much more commercialized now, I guess is a good way to say it. There's a lot more access to it. So digital printing is an option and we will do a project where you're allowed to use infinite colors. So that is what digital printing is perfect for. It's basically like a laser printer, an inkjet printer that applies the color directly to the fabric, and then the fabric is washed and processed and returned to you, and it looks beautiful and perfect because it came out of a printer. So it can use as many colors as an inkjet printer can, so you can do gradients on that, which is very hard to do in screen printing. You can do all kinds of cool special effects. So we will discuss that more later on. And there's also other types of like industrial printing that we can talk about later on too, if you have questions about it. All right, colorways. We're not doing colorways for the very first project that you'll do in my course, but for the other projects, we will do colorways. So a colorway is just another way of saying a color option for the same pattern. And something that's important to think about when you're designing your different colorways is to use similar values or not, but it's just something to consider is the value of the patterns. So over here, in all of these colorways, right? This has 2 different colorways, kind of a blue colorway and a pink colorway, and this has 3 different colorways, black, red, green colorways. These are all really well balanced. Nothing like jumps forward or back more at me because of how they've changed the colors. Like all of the colors kind of have very similar values. Maybe they made this cherry a little bit darker in this, but it doesn't affect like the overall flow of the pattern. Where on these turtles patterns, I just feel like the middle pattern in the turtles, because they like changed kind of the value of some of the colors, they didn't keep the background monochromatic with the foreground. It really changes the feel of the pattern, and like the white jumps out at me way more. It's like way more in the foreground, and you almost lose that darker green color entirely because it's too similar of a value to the background. So that's just something to consider when you do go and start making different color options, or even if you're trying out different color options in this first project, you can consider those things. Just like consider value and what's in the foreground, what's in the background of your pattern, just because of the change of color. So the structure of the repeat is some of the more important information or some of the more important vocabulary that we will discuss here. So the structure is how the individual tiles line up. So by tile, I mean this circle shape. It makes up the whole pattern. That's one tile, let's say. And how those are organized is what we're going to talk about. The most standard organization is the straight repeat, and you can see this lightning bolt pattern is a straight repeat pattern. Straight repeat is also called grid sometimes. In Illustrator, it's called grid. And you can see why. It's because the tiles, these individual, let's say each lightning bolt is one tile. You can even imagine it on your bathroom wall. Um, it's repeated in a straight grid. None of the tiles are offset from each other. You can see in this pattern, even though this pattern has a lot of flow, it is a straight repeat. So we can line up the little monster peeking out over the hill or whatever this is illustrating, and we can see that it is in fact tiling in a grid. The next type of structure is called the half drop, and it's also called brick by column sometimes. Illustrator calls it brick by column, and it's offset halfway, kind of like subway tile, right? So it takes a step down and it's half off from each other. So this pattern on the right, you can see, even though it has a lot of flow, we can see each individual tile and how they take one step down from each other. And the brick by row, also set off each other by subway tile, but this time the rows are offset instead of the columns being offset in the half drop. So sometimes I'll just call this brick because that's what I was taught. I was taught brick, half drop, straight repeat, but Illustrator calls it grid for straight repeat, brick by column for half drop, and brick by row for brick. So sometimes I might interchange that vocabulary just so you know. So we can see in this other snowflake pattern that it is a half drop and, or sorry, a brick by row, and we can see this kind of subway tile pattern that happens. I hope that that makes sense, and please let me know if you need me to review it again later on. So this is, I believe, the last slide, or one of the last slides, is common textile design pitfalls. So these are pretty subtle, the pitfalls that are happening in these designs, but they're the best examples I could find at the time that I made this, this PowerPoint. So these are things to avoid in, like, if you are making like a super traditional textile design where you want everything to flow and you want the eye to move around the page and almost not realize that it is seeing a repeat. And that in like traditional textile design is considered the most ideal textile design. So there's no spot where your eye stops and says like, oh, that's obviously a repeat. I see that. Honestly, there are all types of textile designs that are good, and they don't all need to be this like perfect flowing object with no obvious stops or anything. That's kind of, it's just not always what we're going for. But these are good to notice anyway, if what you're going for is a pretty even flow or an even vibe to the textile design and not something more graphic. So a lineup is an uninterrupted straight line formed by motifs. And normally you see them going like directly across, or sometimes you'll see a lineup going at an angle. And they are related to alleyways. Alleyways are unintentional lines formed by negative space. And I actually I think that this is a good example of an alleyway over here. So in this, we can see these gaps. And if you kind of like let your eyes relax, the gaps kind of like come forward, in my opinion, and we can see them over and over again in these like vertical stripes. So in a pattern like this, her intention is obviously not to get vertical stripes, and that's something that she would want to adjust and avoid. And a lot of times it can be fixed just by like moving a motif over, like, you know, like a quarter of an inch or whatever. Sometimes that's what it takes. I don't have a good example of lineups on here, but I'm sure we'll run into them in class. And I think that the alleyway, you kind of get the idea. And holes are another common pitfall where we have like a big gap in this, and you could probably adjust and easily fit another flower in there and it would be less obvious. And again, if you kind of let your eyes relax a little bit, you can see this big like V-shaped hole over and over again in this little JPEG. So those are just some things to watch out for. Here are some sources. Um, and please let me know if you have any questions. I am always ready to talk about textile design, and I'm excited to get to know all of you. And I hope we have a great semester together. So I'll talk to you later.